What happens when you stay in touch with someone intentionally and grow the relationship? That's what we're going to be exploring today. Welcome to Women Leaders on the Move, a Her C-Suite radio podcast. I'm your host, Natalie Benamou, and every week I have the amazing opportunity of learning right along with you from the guests on this show. I'm also the founder of Her C-Suite, a portfolio career network where women leaders build what's next for boards, entrepreneurship, portfolio careers, and Next to Lead AI. I hope you'll check all of that out at hercsuite.com. And speaking of relationships, my guest today was on the podcast the very first year. She's one of my first interviews. We've stayed in touch, and I can't wait for you to hear how we did that and why it is so important. Pat Hedley is my guest today, and I really enjoyed this conversation with her because she shares all about how she intentionally meets people. She's the author of a book called Meet 100 People. She's a TEDx speaker, and she's also a board director. She's been on multiple boards. She's had an incredible career. And when we first talked about this show, we were going to be all about AI. And you know what? Spoiler alert. This show is all about human connection. Let's get started with this conversation now. Pat, I'm so excited to welcome you to Women Leaders on the Move today. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's always fun to talk with you, Natalie.
And it's so fun because you were one of my very first podcasts, when I launched the show, and to have you back now, there's so much that's changed since then and so much to look forward to. We were just talking about that. But before we get into it, I would love for you to give a snapshot for our listeners who might have missed that first episode, which I will have in the show notes, a little bit about where we are today and how we got here.
Well, it's been an incredible journey. I started my career somewhat serendipitously, and I love telling this story because I think there are a lot of great lessons and reminders. When I was in business school, I decided to get a job in banking for the summer between the 2 years, and I got a letter from a firm that was not known at all. And we didn't have the technology way back then to send a text and say, no, I'm already committed, or, send an email. And I went in my jeans to cancel an interview with this firm. And the short of it was that I did fulfill my commitment to the bank for the summer, but I also worked 4 weeks that summer for this firm that I basically said no to. I worked part time for them in the fall, and then I joined them full time and was with them for nearly 30 years. And I like telling this story because, first of all, showing up matters so much. It mattered then, it matters now. Had I not gone in person, my life would have taken on a very different path. I think being open minded and having conversations is super important. Look, I was willing to have a conversation, even though I was saying no. And to the firm's credit, they were willing to have a conversation with me, even though I told them I was already committed. And then in business, a no doesn't necessarily mean no forever. It means no, not now, or no, not in this structure, or no, not until later in the summer, which is what it meant for me. And so I think not being dissuaded by an obstacle is something to really remember. And that was, an early experience for me, but I think it really taught me a lot then. And in retrospect, it continues to have learnings for me. And, one of the most important, and we talk about this often, is just how important it is to have conversations, how important it is to show up and be in person with other people.
Well, you have a book. The first book was really kind of geared around that sense of you need to have these conversations, the power of in person. And you're right, we drifted away from the in person, and people now crave it more than ever of being able to get together. There's just something magical about that moment when you see the person for the first time. Can you talk about what you've learned and when you wrote that? Because you're now thinking about embarking on a second part to that.
To continue my story, so I was with this firm for nearly 30 years, and then I made a transition. And frankly, any transition is somewhat challenging unless you know exactly what you're going to do next. And I didn't And trying to figure that out is another incredibly important time to tap into your network, to talk to people that you know, and to go through a process of self discovery. And as I did that, I embarked upon a number of projects and I ended up getting involved advising entrepreneurs and CEOs, which is my true passion and love. But in addition to that, I wrote a book. And I wrote a book called Meet 100 People for a couple of reasons. One, it was my way of giving back. It's advice I wish I had had when I was first starting out. I did not come from a well networked background. Not only that, I consider myself somewhat reserved and an introvert, although I've gotten a whole lot better. And I can cite the ways or the reasons that I've been able to help myself on that journey. And it's advice that I had given to so many young people as they first started their exploration of what they wanted to do with their lives and careers. And frankly, it was a journey that I was on myself. And it's something I continue to do to this day. And that's what motivated me to write the book. And I have learned so much in the process of doing that, but also in the process of conveying this message and the reactions that I've gotten from different groups of people, the learnings that I have had, the stories that people have shared with me. And, this was pre COVID. It was pre the whole AI transformation of our lives. And I think after that, after COVID, when these online communications are so easy and so wonderful, and I'm a huge fan of virtually communicating with people because I think that seeing you and speaking to you like this is so far superior to just a phone call, which is how we used to do things. But I would argue it's not sufficient. You have to go beyond that. So this is a great start and it's an improvement over what we had. And then with AI coming to transform our lives and cause some uncertainty for a lot of people simply because they don't know what they don't know yet. I think relationships and the ability to talk and to collaborate and to work together with people will take on increasingly greater importance over time. And I don't think all of us will be disintermediated by technology. I do think a lot of rote work will be done by computers, frankly, as it should. Some of the simple things humans shouldn't be doing. It's not the highest and best use of a lot of people's time. But there will be other things that will continue to be incredibly important. And interacting with one another is top of the list. And so I think touching upon those themes and giving people thoughts and ideas about how to do that effectively, what are tactics that work well? And I have several that I'd love to share and describe. What are things that really make a difference to me when I receive communications from people or how I keep in touch with people that I think will be useful to others too? And so that's what's motivating my thoughts on this perhaps part two of the Meet 100 People series.
Well, one of the things that I personally appreciate so much about you is your openness to stay in touch with people. I interviewed you a long time ago. I think it's 5 years, maybe. Might be 5 years. And you just said, you know what, stay in touch with me. And I did periodically, and you've come into her C suite and you spoke to our boards group, and then, we've collaborated. And most people don't do that. Most people, you talk and then you go. What is the difference for you? Because it means so much to the person. I don't know if you know how much it means to the person on the receiving end, but it certainly does to know that, oh, I'm just going to send a little quick note. Here's an update. And to know that you actually read it. And, that is also really a gift. So, what is that experience like for you on the side of saying that to people?
I will say I'm also on the receiving end of that. And I don't like, having conversations that are one and done necessarily, especially when I talk to, younger entrepreneurs, for example, or young people who come to me for advice. And then I never hear from them again. It's almost like I started a book and, I'm kind of left hanging after chapter one. I'd like to know what happens in chapter two and chapter three. And so I like it when people follow up with me. And, the old adage, do unto others. I feel like if I don't do that, if I like it and then I'm not doing that to others, then it's not going to happen to me. And so, there's this other important learning I've had in my life, and probably a little later than I wish I had, but the single person that you can control is yourself. And so whatever it is that you wish, do it yourself first. So I actually do like to follow up with people. I do like to keep in touch with people. I like it when people are aware of what's going on in my life. And similarly, I love to know what's next for someone else. And some people do this very well, and others don't do it quite as well. And I would suggest, especially for entrepreneurs and people in business, there are certain moments that you can do this very effectively. And one particular moment in time that it's a great time to reach out to your circle. And again, you should define who that circle is. Who are the people that you really want to, inform of things that are changing? Honestly, your LinkedIn connections are your circle. And it's therefore I love LinkedIn for like posting things that are relevant to you. But if you get a new job or a new promotion or a new position, tell people about it. People are going to be happy for you and they may bring opportunities to you. And, they're going to perhaps have you top of mind. There's a lot to be said for just being out there and reminding someone you exist. The world's busy. I mean, we all have more emails than we probably can handle and information coming from a variety of sources. So it's easy to sometimes forget, not maliciously at all, but just because you're overloaded, about some wonderful conversation you had, unless that person comes into your life in some way. And you're so glad to receive it because then you think about that person and then they'll give you an opportunity. And I think the experience that you and I had, Natalie, just a couple of weeks ago is perfect. I mean, you reached out, it was somewhat last minute and said, I'm on a panel. Would you like to join me on this panel? It happened to be perfect timing. I was available and free. Someone else might have said perhaps they would have found some reason not to do it, but I thought to myself, why not do it? It's not always that I actually do have that window. Why not take up that opportunity? Why not have the chance to see you in person, which we will have another chance? And why not put myself out there, join this panel, meet these individuals, none of whom I know, and yet it was a wonderful experience. It was one of those where I am grateful to you for thinking of me. It was very special and it continued our conversation. And I actually think there's another really important point there for everybody listening. When there's an opportunity to include someone, to invite someone to join you on a panel or to go to an event, or, there's an extra spot at the table for an event you're hosting and you say, come join me. First of all, don't hesitate to ask, even if it's last minute, because you didn't. And thank you that you did not. And make the effort. Do that. It's a little thing, but it really does help knit relationships together. And I think these stories are stories people need to hear because it's motivating, it's inspiring. I love including people. I love telling people about things that I've read that I know might be of interest to them, or something in the media that I'm aware of, or an event or a conference. Share that with others because in sharing, there's just so much more that comes back to you. You don't lose anything by sharing.
Yeah, I'm reminded, of course, when I reached out to you, and I'm going to share this with the audience because I think we sometimes tend to think, well, what will they think if I'm asking and it's closer to the date? And it was just a circumstance that I was invited to be on this panel and, we were talking and who else do you know? And I thought, who do I know in the New York area? Oh, I know Pat. Let me see if she's available. And I could have thought, Well, I shouldn't even ask because it might seem like I'm, so last minute. It wasn't like the day before for people listening, but I think we tend to tell ourselves stories of, well, we shouldn't because, and you're denying the opportunity to say yes. I think we're so ready to hear the no that we were denying the opportunity to have something really nice come out of it. So I want to encourage our listeners to think about a time when you might have told yourself, well, I shouldn't do this because flip that script, right? And think about what could happen, and also on the receiving end, that person, like yourself, you enjoyed doing it, which was, I'm so glad that that worked out. Now, we've been talking a lot about in person, but there's also a piece of the work that you do. And we talk about boards, which we haven't gotten to yet. That was the panel we were talking about. I think more than ever, the in person is important because of AI kind of putting a barrier a little bit in between. We start, if we were hiding in COVID, now it's even more so. What are you seeing in the boards world with how that is infecting people's relationships?
I absolutely see a movement toward people desiring to be together in person. And I think there is a different kind of culture, a different kind of sense when people are in a boardroom together versus on a Zoom screen. I actually think that people are more thoughtful when they're with one another. And I think that they're more aware of body language, of how people are reacting to things. Look, humans are really good at this. They're good at picking up subtle signals, which are a little bit harder with technology. And even more important than that, and I would strongly argue for this, is what happens both before and after the meeting. Because I have found in the course of my career, sometimes the most consequential conversations happen pre meeting and post meeting. Sometimes it's during the dinner the night before. And I actually am a huge believer and proponent of sharing a meal with fellow board members the night before or, lunch or even breakfast the morning of. But to be in an environment where you're sharing a meal, it just helps bond you in a way that I think is incredibly positive. And so when you show up in person, you can have those pre meeting conversations. You can have those post meeting debriefs that are much more difficult to do via Zoom. I mean, some people do it and, that's helpful. But those of us who have spent our careers pre COVID in an office where we know what goes on both before and after sessions, we realize that there's real value there and there's real learning, regardless of what level you are within the organization. If you're the most senior person, you learn a lot by observing what your colleagues are doing and who's talking with whom and what are the issues that are being raised. And how can you be really mindful and thoughtful of what the undercurrent of what is happening? So, again, very big advocate of being with other people in person as much as you can, understanding that it's not always possible because of travel and geography and whatever other considerations from time to time, you do need to rely on virtual technology. But if you're doing that, show up on Zoom, turn your camera on, make sure people see your face. I also have, and I don't know if it's changed as much of late, I also hear of these Zoom sessions where all you see are black boxes. Well, that's just like being on a phone. And then you're really not taking advantage of the opportunity to connect in a human way. And my AI transcriber is going to show up right on time and transcribe everything that's said. But how about the human Pat who, is thoughtful and is looking at what other people how they're reacting, what they might be saying, and very importantly, what they're not saying. And, there's a whole lot to be said to who's saying what and who's not really focused on perhaps some of the things others are.
You can sense that dynamic, like you're saying, of the person that's reserved for whatever reason. They may have a reason that has nothing to do with the board meeting, or they may have, things weighing on them. But interpersonal relationships, you can really assess in person a lot easier than on Zoom. And I would agree that sometimes, if you're on a long webinar and you're trying to do other things, that's one thing. But if you're in a meeting, I think whenever possible, being on camera makes such a difference. And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, I did not like being on video. I could not get used to it. I was like, I just don't want to be on video. I don't know why we have to be on video. Can't we just do this as a call? Because the technology hadn't, sure, it existed, but it really wasn't in our like everyday lives at that point. And now I only am on video. So it's like you go the two ends. What are you seeing in terms of the future and looking forward with interpersonal relationships on boards? And we were talking about how important it is in person, but now there's all the risk and there's a lot of transformation happening. How is that playing a part in how boards are really thinking about what they're doing next?
Look, I think one of the challenges for any board director is to continually educate oneself and to be aware of what's happening in the world and within the organization that they're involved with. And I think the very best board directors are ones who spend a tremendous amount of time doing research. And for that, they can get AI aides to help them do those, that kind of research. And then also to talk to the individuals, even the layer below to the degree that they can, to understand how the world is changing that particular organization's operations and results. And to ask, kind of those important questions about what are you seeing? What are you seeing on the manufacturing floor? What are you seeing in terms of the employees? What are you seeing post the implementation of this AI solution? Is it working for clients? You don't really understand that until you have the opportunity to go to, I mean, it depends on the company very much, but a manufacturing site, a retail store, whatever it is, a service organization. You have to be there. So I think that there's not just, a focus on in-person board meetings, but also on having individuals within the organization come and present, come and meet the night before at a cocktail event or whatever, and having groups of directors, perhaps in terms of whatever their committee related obligations are, spend time within the organization. Certainly, and this is one area that I think is really important for board directors, especially because AI is so new and most people don't have the information, to really make a concerted effort to understand what capabilities exist within the organization in a technology level, so that aspect, and then make some assessment of that so that you can bring in outside resources to be helpful to you. And one of the most important questions I would think for any head of technology is, what are you seeing? How are you seeing things evolve? How does it impact your organization? And where are you getting your sources of information? And kind of understanding how they're self educating. And what I'd like to hear from an individual like that is, I have a number of peers I get together with monthly, and we talk about these things regularly. I go to two incredibly important conferences per year. I meet new people there. That's where I get a lot of my information. I have a handful of vendors that I reach out to, whether they're working for me right now or not, just to understand what they're seeing and what kind of projects they're implementing. Those answers would give me some level of comfort. The lack of that gives me a little bit of concern that the individual may be too siloed and might not be seeing broadly what's happening. Or, that individual is traveling regularly to counterparts in other locations, other parts of the world, because this change is happening at different rates in different places. Would give me a lot of confidence to know that, the person's on the road and is really trying to understand this a whole lot better. So I'm giving this as an example of kind of questions a director might ask, and how a director, in understanding that, might educate themselves better about what's going on, specifically related to technology, just as relevant to any other specific functional area. What are you doing in talent? Who are you talking to? Who's best in class? And why do you think they are best in class? I love asking people who they think are great, other people who are great, because then you know that they've given some thought to what does good look like. And it's very interesting to understand why somebody admires a company, an organization, an individual.
Hey, it's Natalie, and I wanted to pop in and give you a personal invitation. We are hosting a special program for women wanting to land a corporate board role this year. And it's a small group of women. We will walk you through in an accelerated day. I hope if you are planning to get on a board this year, but you feel a little stuck, this program is for you. Check out the link in the show notes, and let's get back to this conversation now. When you are a curious learner, not only do you learn, but you're also able to really understand and make assessments about a situation better than if you are kind of shying away from knowing what's happening and staying in the vertical. And I love your get out and ask and also surround yourself. And this goes along with your Meet 100 and who you're around, right? It's surround yourself with people that might be a step ahead of you, even in technology or whatever your role is. That I think has really makes a big difference as well. I know I could talk to you all day, Pat, and I want to ask one last question, which is you're looking forward, and I know you are an amazing advisor and a board director. And what are you excited about in the future as you think about what's next for you?
I am excited about a couple of things. I love watching this field of AI. I have a little bit of a, firsthand view on this. I have 3 adult children, 2 of whom co-founded a business that's focused on AI development for enterprises. And so that is definitely exciting to me. It's a little bit personal, but a little bit business, I have to say. I continue to be incredibly enthusiastic and inspired by the topic of how we all continue to build relationships in our networks and what are ways that people can be successful in doing that. And I really do love advising entrepreneurs and CEOs on how they can build the right kind of cultures and how they, through their relationships, can be successful in building the kind of businesses that they want to build. There may be this second book in me. I am going to be doing some writing to explore that and just to share some of the stories that I think people might find interesting. As the older I get, the more I realize that people do relate to stories. I know I do. When someone starts telling me a story, my interest level starts to peak, and I like to know what the resolution of that is. In fact, you brought up the term curiosity. I have found that it is my own personal curiosity that has completely been able to reframe the way I think about meeting new people, and that the natural reserve that I have goes away because I am curious. And I fundamentally believe that we all have treasures, and meeting new people and talking to new people is almost like a treasure hunt. And I think finding those people that you can contribute to, but from whom you can learn, I think is a really important part of anyone's life and career. Entrepreneurs, I always suggest to them, talk to investors well before you need them. You need to know what kind of investor you'd like. And if you're doing it last minute, it's not going to yield as good results as if you already have a network with whom you're communicating and you're telling them what's going on. And basically, you're telling them, I don't need capital now, but I want to keep you informed. Talk to talent well before you need that talent. If you're hiring a CFO, and this is for board directors, and you haven't talked to a dozen or so CFOs, you don't know what a good CFO really looks like. You need to have that experience base. So make it a point to talk to not just your CFO, but other CFOs who may bring different experiences to bear. So that if you go through a search process, you know what? You're going to have early pattern recognition. You'll be able to tell if somebody really meets the criteria that you think are needed for the opportunity and role. And I think same for board directors. So, anybody who's on a board certainly has their colleagues that they speak with, and it's important to build those relationships. But it's also really important to be in rooms with other board directors, whether it's at a conference or through other connections you have. And, just like I talked about the CTO who monthly has a dinner with a couple of colleagues, creating that. If it exists, join. And if it doesn't exist, you can create it. You can find 2 or 3 people who are local to you and say, once a quarter, let's have breakfast or let's have lunch. And honestly, most people don't take the effort to extend the invitation, but most people also accept once they get that invitation. So don't say no to yourself, which is what we talked about earlier. Don't expect that people are going to say no. Expect that they're going to say yes. And I think there's really a desire for people with like-minded needs, problems that they can discuss in a safe environment. There's a desire for that. I have always found that people are very willing to come together, especially when there are other like-minded people in the room.
Pat, I so enjoyed having you today with me, and my mind is going in all directions, but we of course unfortunately have to say goodbye today, but we'll have you back because there's no limit to the opportunities that we can find together. If people want to find you, where's your favorite place that they can find you?
The best place to reach out to me is on LinkedIn, to be perfectly honest. Send me a message though. Don't just send a cold LinkedIn. Do give me a little context on that because that's helpful to me. And check out my website, meet100people.com for a little more information and for anything new that I happen to post there.
I'm so glad we had this chance to be together. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I very much look forward to the next time.
Thanks so much for joining us on this conversation. If you have been thinking about relationships and also how to get on a board, all the things that we talked about today, Pat and I, are really key to landing a corporate board role. So many people think that the path to a board is building a huge network or being recruited. But as you heard in the conversation with Pat, what really matters is relationships and the people closest to you. I hope that you are building those. And if you're not sure what to do, check out Pat's book, Meet 100 People. It's a great way to get started and make those connections. I would so appreciate it if you found this episode helpful. Will you share it with a friend or colleague and rate and review the show? It's how others find us. I want you to know how much I appreciate you all around the world listening in every week. Keep shining your light bright. The world needs you.